Holmes, you have a curious fascination with human nature. Today, you've turned your keen eye upon a matter long debated. Joseph Smith, the founder of the Latter-day Saint movement, or the Mormons, and the allegation that he introduced polygamy. So Watson says, so where do we begin? And Holmes, where any detective begins, with witnesses, documents, and context. Holmes goes on, first, Watson, let's consider the primary witnesses, not distant admirers, not later interpreters, but those who were present in Nauvoo, directly responsible for governance in the church and moral oversight. Number one, Emma Smith. She wasn't just Joseph Smith's wife. She was the president of the Relief Society. The Relief Society in that day was a women's organization that had full control, apart from the men, had full control over the women. They called their own officers, they did their own meetings, they ran completely independent of the men. And they were charged by Joseph, Emma's husband, to protect women and root out immoral behavior. Because as we'll see sooner or later, the church was accused of polygamy for years and immorality. And Joseph was trying to root that out. So he gave a charge to his wife, Emma Smith, to root out all immoral behavior in the church. She oversaw such cases as John Bennett, a man engaged in documented sexual misconduct with many sisters, and he was excommunicated. But she had a hand in dealing with the women in that issue. Number two, William Marks, who was the stake president and the president of the High Council. So he was the most important person in the church in Nauvoo, in that whole large city of Nauvoo, the center place of where Joseph's church was. He was the president of the stake with a High Council. It's important to remember here that the 12 apostles had no authority over him, over his counselors, over his stake, over anything. They were traveling missionaries to watch over and help the church wherever there was no stake. So he oversaw all moral discipline, like John Bennett being excommunicated, or William Law, different men that were excommunicated. So he took care of all the most difficult cases. And these two men, Bennett and Law, had been counselors to Joseph Smith in the first presidency. So he took care of the most difficult cases. And he had full knowledge of all the internal conflict in Nauvoo, in the church, and judged immorality consistently. We need to look at James Whitehead, who was Joseph Smith's scribe, and recorded statements and actions contemporaneous to Joseph, not decades later. So he's a very important witness because he recorded at the time. Hyrum Smith, he was Joseph Smith's brother, and he was the co-president or co-leader in the church, or call him deputy church leader. He publicly denounced polygamy as that damn fool doctrine in 1844, and noted that men came to him weekly asking how to participate in polygamy, demonstrating that the secret was circulating within the community, that there were people actually doing polygamy within the community. And number five, maybe most important, Joseph Smith himself. He directed the High Council, especially William Marks, just 2 weeks before his death, before he's murdered. He told William Marks to root out anyone, including the 12, anyone who was involved in immorality and polygamy, to root them out, or else the church would be driven out of the United States. He explicitly instructed Marks that rank, meaning rank in the church, would not protect offenders. Watson, it's as if we are examining a scene in a locked room. The witnesses are few, but positioned to see everything, and that's the key. We have to look at these key witnesses. Holmes, exactly, Watson. Proximity, authority, and responsibility are key indicators of reliability. I've mentioned John T. Bennett, who really is a control case of what was going on at the time. Holmes, consider Bennett, who was a counselor to Joseph Smith, who was excommunicated for immorality. Exposed for immoral behavior, he was formally tried and disciplined by the High Council presided over by Marks. This case serves as a control, an immoral actor brought to justice. If Joseph had been engaged in similar behavior, Marks and Emma would have had no choice but to act identically with Joseph as they had with Bennett. Watson, So Bennett demonstrates that concealment of sexual misconduct in Nauvoo was impossible for insiders. Holmes, exactly. The judicial system functioned as intended, even against the highest ranking men. Holmes. Hyrum Smith, second highest leader, provides contemporaneous repudiation of plural marriage. March 15th, 1844. Public statement in the Times and Seasons, which was a newspaper for the Mormons. No doctrine allowed men to have multiple wives. Any teaching otherwise was false doctrine and subject to discipline. And maybe more importantly, in April 8th and 9th in 1844, this is like less than 2 months before Hyrum, and his brother Joseph were murdered in Carthage jail. In a conference address, we're talking to at least 1,000, if not more, men, mostly who are going off on missions. Hyrum denounced spiritual wives and polygamy, calling it a damn fool doctrine, and warned that anyone teaching it would face high council discipline and have their license removed, and emphasize one lawful wife only, which was the law of the church at the time. Holmes. Hyrum's 1844 sermons describe men asking how to join the so-called many-wives system. The practice was secret, improvised, and not sanctioned by Joseph. Joseph instructed Marks to discipline anyone involved, regardless of rank. That was the law of the church, and probably the law of the land as well. Watson. So the rumors were about others, not Joseph. Holmes. Precisely. The appearance of a secret movement does not implicate Joseph when the internal enforcement structure explicitly forbade it. Holmes. Hyrum's public authoritative stance confirms the official rejection of polygamy in Nauvoo. Getting on to Emma Smith, who, as I said, was the wife, the leader of the Relief Society of all the women in the church, and the guardian of moral order. Watson. We now examine Emma Smith. Her testimony is crucial, not only as Joseph's wife, but also as president of the Nauvoo Relief Society, giving her unique oversight over the women of the church. Emma's dual role. She was, as I mentioned, the wife of Joseph Smith, the only one that Joseph claimed, actually. Emma was intimately aware of Joseph's private conduct and teachings. As president of the Relief Society, appointed by Joseph Smith in 1842, Emma's leadership role was institutional and authoritative. She was explicitly instructed to use the Relief Society to monitor and protect women in Nauvoo, particularly against immoral behavior or exploitation, as was the case with John Bennett. Her mandate included investigating allegations against men like John C. Bennett and ensuring women were not deceived by false spiritual claims. Holmes. Emma had both access and authority, a combination no other woman in Nauvoo possessed. Emma's actions and statements regarding polygamy. Under her leadership, the Relief Society repudiated polygamy and spiritual wifery. Emma herself publicly condemned any system of marriage other than authorized in Scripture. She worked to root out immorality and protect women, consistent with Joseph's instructions to her. Any man caught teaching or practicing deceptive marriage schemes was to be disciplined or reported to the Council of Marks. She consistently denied Joseph's involvement in polygamy, emphasizing that any such rumors were false. From the moment it was ever mentioned to the end of her days, she never varied on that. Holmes. Emma's dual role gave her both knowledge and authority to observe or intervene if Joseph had engaged in plural marriage. The fact that she never accused him, despite controlling the Relief Society and seeing private behavior, carries substantial evidentiary weight. Holmes. Watson, we next consider William Marks, president of the Nauvoo Stake and High Council, a key witness who oversaw morality cases, including those like Bennett. What Marks explicitly said in 1853 letter from RLDS sources. Polygamy was introduced into the church, but Marks opposed it. Marks recounts a private conversation with Joseph in which Joseph said the doctrine was wrong deceptive, and needed to be stopped. Crucially, Marx does not claim Joseph originated polygamy. Joseph received a revelation commanding it. Joseph instituted it as doctrine, official doctrine of the church. Holmes. Marx confirms the existence of polygamy and Joseph's opposition, but he assigns no authorship or sanction to Joseph. Holmes goes on to say, Emma, through the Relief Society, protected women. Marx, through the High Council, administered justice. Any hidden activity of the same nature would have been exposed, yet neither accused Joseph. That is highly instructive. Holmes. James Whitehead, a scribe and clerk, provides contemporaneous testimony of what Joseph actually taught. Who he was. He was clerk and recorder in Nauvoo, scribe for Joseph, and intimately involved in church administration, as well as if any revelations were received and writing those down. He did not travel west with Brigham and the 12. Whitehead said he had never heard Joseph teaching polygamy, never knew Joseph to authorize or practice spiritual wifism. Joseph opposed such teachings publicly and privately. Any secret teachings were by others, not Joseph. And why his testimony is significant. He was scribe with direct access to Joseph's words. It was contemporaneous, independent, and sworn testimony, not aligned with the Utah Mormonism, the ones that practice polygamy. The affidavit strengthens case against Joseph initiating polygamy. Holmes. Whitehead corroborates the evidence from Marx, Emma, and Hyrum. Holmes. Watson, to understand the central figure, we must consider Joseph Smith's own words, codified laws as the prophet or lawgiver or the president of the church, and all his actions during the Nauvoo period. Probably most important is Doctrine and Covenants, section 101, which is in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, which was, until Joseph's death, the law of the church in regards to marriage. Section 101 establishes monogamy as the law of the church, defining marriage as a union of one man and one woman. In Section 101, due to accusations of plural marriage, which is actually in the Section 101, saying that the church had been accused of plural marriage. So the reason they put this in the law of the church under Joseph and voted in by the members was that, yes, there had been accusations or rumors. So they made sure that everyone knew exactly what the law of the church were, and the members were to follow these rules. Violations were subject to discipline by Marx and his council. All doctrines were to be accepted by common consent. This is crucial to understand the Latter-day Saints during Joseph's day. Anything he brought forward to the church, anything and everything, nothing was in secret. He brought them forward to be presented to the church, and the church would then vote on it, yea or nay. It's very important to understand. He wanted to get rid of one of his counselors, Sidney Rigdon, who was doing some messed ups, but he was very beloved as well by some of the church members. So when Joseph asked to have a new counselor, he had to put it up for common consent, and the church members voted against Joseph Smith and said, no, you have to keep him as your counselor. So he said, fine, if you want him, I'll keep him. Because that was the law of the church. Everything had to be by common consent. That way everybody was responsible for keeping the law because they consented to it. That was stopped, of course, after Joseph's death. So all doctrines were to be accepted by common consent, publicly, not secretly. And that's key because the polygamy statement by the Utah LDS is that it was in secret. Yet Joseph consistently emphasized that no secret doctrines could override the church's law. What was canonized was the law of the church. Holmes, even doctrinally, Watson, Joseph codified monogamy as normative and rejected secrecy and polygamy, of course. Joseph, on these actual polygamy accusations, he reportedly said that he was accused of having 7 wives but could only find one, meaning Emma, which demonstrated concern for transparency. He consistently spoke against polygamy and condemned any spiritual wife systems taught or practiced secretly by others. The Book of Mormon, which Joseph Smith brought forward, is the most polygamy of all Scripture, and it's explicit in condemnation of polygamy even for David and Solomon in the Bible, which reinforces Joseph's stance on polygamy. Holmes, any claim that Joseph secretly taught polygamy contradicts both his public words and scriptural teachings. Moving on to, did he initiate action against polygamy? And this is important. Joseph personally instructed William Marks and the Nauvoo High Council to discipline any member, which would mean himself, caught teaching or practicing polygamy, regardless of rank. This included oversight of the 12 apostles themselves, or anyone in the High Council. Anyone in the church had to obey the same law, which demonstrated his commitment to moral governance. Holmes, Joseph empowered Marks to root out polygamy wherever it appeared. This proactive approach shows he could not have been secretly initiating it himself while going to Marks and say, yeah, go after them all, on transparency and public acceptance. Joseph insisted that any doctrinal or organizational change be made publicly with consent of the members. He explicitly rejected secret doctrines or hidden commands, further undercutting claims that he could have initiated polygamy secretly. Holmes, Joseph codified monogamy, opposed secret polygamy, and took direct institutional action to prevent it. All evidence points to him not initiating polygamy in Nauvoo. Another key thing I just want to interject here is that Joseph Smith, when he was doing the Book of Mormon, he gave to a friend the 116 pages of the manuscript, which were then lost or stolen. And he was rebuked severely by God. And he published that rebuke in the Doctrine and Covenants, in the laws of the church. The rebuke against him. He's also rebuked in another revelation where he's rebuked for doing certain things. So he did not hide things. He was not into secrecy. It was not his way. Everything had to be up and above board. But that is not the same for all the members that were in the church at the time. Holmes, weeks before Joseph and Hyrum were killed, Joseph told Marks, any man caught in this, polygamy, must come before the High Council regardless of his rank. Holmes, consider, Watson, if Joseph were participating, he would have called for his own prosecution. That is logically absurd. The High Council's authority extended to the 12, and Joseph's warning threatened all participants, yet he himself was never implicated. Watson, then his death, Joseph's, removed the only authority capable of enforcing discipline. Holmes, indeed, timing and institutional authority are crucial here. Posthumous developments after Joseph and Hyrum were killed. After 1844, men like Heber C. Kimball and Brigham Young later openly acknowledged plural wives. Secret practices became public only after Joseph's death. This shows that Joseph did not authorize it. Secrecy and leadership vacuum explain subsequent expansion. Watson, so accusations of Joseph starting polygamy are not supported by contemporaneous evidence. Holmes, correct. Evidence emerged after the fact, often decades later, when incentives and context changed. Watson, Holmes, has any woman or man contemporaneous to Joseph, like written during Joseph's lifetime, claimed in a diary or journal that they were secretly married to him or knew of him being married to other women? Holmes, none, Watson. No journals or letters from the 1830s to 1844 claim such marriages. All claims emerge later, often in the Utah period. In contrast, Emma, Marks, Whitehead, and Hyrum provide contemporaneous testimony, or testimony at the time, denying Joseph's participation. And in context as well, these men, Marks and Whitehead, as well as Emma Smith, did not go west with the people that were practicing polygamy. Holmes, the only other voices are excommunicated members or anti-Mormon writers. Their claims, we're talking at the time in the 1800s, in 1840 to 44, it doesn't really matter, but before Joseph's death, their claims require extraordinary evidence to outweigh the testimony of Nauvoo insiders. Marx presided over moral discipline. Emma protected women. Hyrum publicly denounced polygamy. Whitehead recorded Joseph's words. These individuals had authority, proximity, and oversight. The anti-Mormon witnesses had motives, grievances, ideological opposition, or fame, but no institutional power to enforce or to observe. Holmes, Watson, the only sources alleging Joseph initiated polygamy are excommunicated Nauvoo members and anti-Mormon writers. These sources were motivated by grievance or politics, often no contemporaneous proof, cannot match the credibility of those in authority, Marx, Emma, Hyrum, and Whitehead. Watson, so their testimony is inherently weaker. Holmes, indeed, Watson. Credibility is diminished when the claim contradicts what those with direct knowledge consistently report. Watson, Holmes, might Marx, Emma, Whitehead, or Hyrum have defended Joseph out of self-interest? Holmes, no, Watson. They were not participants in polygamy. They explicitly rejected it. They had nothing to gain and much to lose. The church moved west without their organization. They had no large following. Their only stake was integrity and the good names of those they loved, especially Joseph. That independence makes their testimony far more credible than that of ex-members or anti-Mormon writers. Holmes's assessment of the evidence, based on authority and proximity, so Emma, Marx, Hyrum, and Whitehead were insiders with intimate knowledge, contemporaneous denial, written or spoken statements from 1842 to 1844, absence of direct claim, no contemporaneous journals of anyone claimed Joseph secretly married multiple wives, counter voices, excommunicated or politically motivated, lacking evidence, integrity. These witnesses risked nothing less than reputation and authority by speaking truth. Holmes, when all factors are considered, Watson, the balance of evidence strongly supports that Joseph Smith did not originate or sanction polygamy in Nauvoo and actively opposed it. The verdict. Watson, after reviewing all this evidence, the conclusion is clear, with authoritative texts applied, proximity, institutional role, absence of motive to innovate testimony, and contemporaneous documentation or documentation at the time, the evidence significantly favors the conclusion that Joseph Smith did not originate polygamy during his lifetime, nor was he implicated by those with both authority and access to truth. Holmes, to accuse a historical figure of a doctrine or practice without contemporaneous evidence, when such evidence would reasonably exist if the claim were true, is contrary to solid reasoning. The accusations do not surpass the threshold of proof required to overturn the consistent testimony from those in Nauvoo who knew him best. Holmes, the lesson here, Watson, is timeless. Historical investigation must rely on critical examination of the closest evidence, not on later recollections or polemics. Reasonable doubt remains where documentation is absent, yet where testimony is consistent, authoritative, and contemporaneous, we must give it its due. Watson, a judicious verdict, Holmes, not driven by belief but by evidence. Holmes, precisely, Watson. In history, as in detection, we seek the most plausible explanation grounded in the strongest evidence available. So that ends our little diatribe with Holmes and Watson, but I hope that you enjoyed it. But yes, that is how I see it. If you take away all writings after 1844, just take it all away and just deal with what was in Nauvoo at the time and written at the time, that it is clear that Joseph Smith did not participate in polygamy, did not have multiple wives, did not initiate polygamy, had nothing to do with it, and only condemned it, and most likely it led to his death. Because, like I said, 2 weeks before he was killed, he spoke to William Marks, the top man for authority in terms of moral discipline in the church. And he said he wanted it rooted out. All men, he would be including himself, anyone found participating in polygamy was to be disciplined and removed if necessary. He gave Marx the authority to go after anyone, including himself, for the practice of polygamy. So if he had been practicing polygamy with, as the LDS Church in Utah says, and ex-Mormons, that he had 50-something wives, then I'm sure one of them would have spoken up, or that Emma would have known, since she was the president of all the women in the Relief Society. And since there are no journal entries, nothing, the only evidence comes from the Nauvoo Expositor, written by ex-Mormons who hated Joseph Smith with a passion, or from the Warsaw Record or other papers in the area from non-LDS who disliked Joseph Smith immensely. There were all kinds of problems going on in his life at the time. He was anti-slavery. He was running for president of the United States at the time of his death on a platform to get rid of slavery and to compensate the owners of the slaves. It was not popular in Missouri for sure, and it was not popular even with many in Illinois. So there were many factors leading up to his death, and Holmes would say there is no evidence of who actually killed Joseph and Hyrum. But at the same time, there were a lot of going-ons, hanky-panky, if you want to call it, going on behind Joseph's back among men who he trusted and should have had his back, but did not. They were doing things like polygamy behind his back while he was trying his best to run the church. And it's a shame what happened. It is a shame. And one day, I guess the truth will come out, but it's pretty difficult to get at in these days. But if we look at these witnesses at the time, take away everything that came from the polygamists later on, you see a very different viewpoint of Joseph Smith than what you'll find on YouTube everywhere about Joseph Smith and his many wives, when he only, as he said, couldn't find the 7 he was accused of. He could only find one, Emma, who was his beloved. The letters between him and her to the day he died were congenial, full of love and compassion and kindness. They were together. They weren't divorced. They weren't separated. There was no disharmony. They were a wonderful couple and supported one another to the day that he was killed. And so I just want to leave it there, come up with the conclusions that you might, but that is my belief, that Joseph was an honorable man, and he had his mistakes, absolutely. He trusted too many men and women, I suppose, but really he trusted too many men who were power hungry, and it led to his demise. And maybe he didn't even see it coming. He said that he knew things weren't going well. He said that he knew his life was on the line, but he did not know, couldn't even see from where it was coming, which is why he spoke with Marx about being deceived, and that polygamy was going to cost them dearly and drive them from the United States, which it did. Anyway, thanks for listening. I hope you have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.